thank you. In our current world right now, we're always on our computers and Zooming. So for everyone to willingly get back on their computers to try to do something social and book related is much appreciated, especially in support of indie bookstores and romance writers. As a romance reader, it warms my heart because I feel like we've come a long way for independent bookstores, and I feel like we wouldn't have seen this 3 years ago. So I'm so excited for everyone to be here to host this amazing launch for Farah. For those of you who are tuning in around the world, Belmont Books is an independent bookstore in the greater Boston area. We have a pretty robust virtual events calendar right now. So next week, we have Jennifer Dupee, which is another launch in conversation with Marjan Kamali. So I believe the book is like women's historical fiction. Wednesday, we have Jess Phoenix, who is like a badass volcanologist, in conversation with Jill Heinerth, who did Into the Planet last year. She's a deep sea cave diver, so really cool women in science event. Thursday, we have Kate Russo in conversation with NPR's Petra Meyer about Kate Russo's debut novel. And then Friday is super exciting. We have a YA panel on duologies. So I think all 4 books are YA fantasy. And Kate Stroll, or I think it's Kate Stroll, of BuzzFeed is going to be, or Rachel Stroll is going to be the moderator. So we have 4 different authors and Rachel on panel. So that's also going to be very exciting. I'm going to introduce the 3 authors, and then they're going to talk and chat for about 45 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A. So all of you should hopefully see these 2 little speech bubbles at the bottom of your screen. It says Q&A. You can submit all of your questions there for the authors, but I will be hovering in chat. So if one slips through there, that's totally fine. I will catch it. So I will moderate those. But most importantly, I hope you all enjoy this wonderful discussion about these food-related books. So first off, Farah Heron. We are here to talk about Accidentally Engaged. It is currently a staff pick at Belmont Books this month. So we are very excited for this book. I've personally enjoyed it. Farah weaves complicated story arcs and uplifting happily ever afters in her daydreams while pursuing careers in human resources and psychology. She started writing these stories down a few years ago and never looked back. She writes rom-coms and women's fiction full of huge South Asian families, delectable food, yes, definitely the food, and more importantly, brown people falling stupidly in love, which I think is the best way to fall in love. She lives in Toronto with her husband, 2 children, and a rabbit named Strawberry. She is considering getting a cat. As a cat owner, I say go for it.
I did actually. I got 2 cats
Oh,
already.
you did?
Yes, like
This is an
a
important
couple months ago.
development. So
I know Estelle keeps bugging me to change my my bio.
Estelle, as a fellow cat lover, I'm sure she's here. Yep, there she is.
She's thrilled.
Yes. My cat is banished from the room, so sorry.
Yes, mine are banished.
And then we have Sonali Dev, who is always a riot to have on a panel. I love it when she's doing stuff. She writes Bollywood-style love stories that explore issues faced by women around the world. Her novels have been on Library Journal, FPR, Washington Post. She's won the ALA's award for Best Romance. There are so many things this woman has done. I have been a longtime fan of Sonali since her Bollywood series. She lives in Chicago with her husband, 2 visiting adult children, and the world's most perfect dog. And then we have Roselle Lim, who just launched Vanessa Yu's Magical Paris Tea Shop, I think late last year. I thought it was great, especially we can't travel right now. So I've been reading a lot of like armchair travel books. So I enjoyed getting to know Paris through Roselle's book. Roselle is a Filipino-Chinese writer who came to Canada from the Philippines as a young teen and learned English by watching wrestling shows on television. She has a degree in humanities and history from York University. I will turn it over to you 3. I will be back in 40 or so minutes. I hope you have a blast.
I know we're gonna have a blast because I'm with 2 of my like favorite writers and very good friends. So I'm so excited that you guys are here.
Thank you so much for having us, and thanks, Amanda. That was fabulous. And before anyone says anything, everybody, all 120 of you on the call, oops, wrong book. We'll get that one too, but get this book. It is a delight. Like, every word is a delight. I laughed out loud. Don't be drinking hot coffee when you're reading it. You know, it's preposterously funny. I loved it.
That means so much to me, Sonali. What you may not know, I think some of my writer friends will know, but I did not have any intention of writing South Asian stories until I first read a Sonali Dev book. So you literally changed my career. You gave me a career, because I don't think I would have been published with my mediocre white people romances. So and
you tell me this on camera.
So
so
telling me this on camera.
Speechless.
So I'm so grateful to you. I'm very happy that you're here. And Roselle, I'm so happy that you came too. Roselle is the person I go to when I'm feeling like I'm losing touch with reality. So we have a very good relationship with kind of boosting each other up. Wouldn't you say, Rosie?
Yes, text with lots of typos and memes and whatever not.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah, that's exactly it. And an interesting thing that Roselle and I have in common is that we both, I live in Scarborough, which is a part of Toronto, and Roselle used to live in Scarborough. And we actually both lived on the same street for a while and didn't know each other at all then, which I find hilarious.
It is, because when Farah and I talk, we talk about the same restaurants, and that's how we kind of figured out that we
didn't know each other.
The same
Yeah.
walk. Yeah.
Yeah, we lived, and I mean, there was a lot of houses, it was a big street, but still.
Yeah.
That's fun. And no longer, right? Now you're not even.
No, not anymore. No, but it's quite funny that she mentioned something. I'm like, I lived around the corner from you then.
That's funny. So how are we going to do this, Farah? I was thinking, because you have these lovely questions that you came up with, and and I was like, here is Farah, and she has to, like, do we want her to moderate her own own launch party? But
Sonali, you can take the odd questions. I'll take the even.
Perfect. That one's odd, right? I'm kidding.
Yeah.
The Indian math gene skipped me, or the Asian math gene skipped me, but I do know that one is odd. All right. So the first question, this is the perfect thing to start with, is that all three of us write immigrant stories that involve food and family. And that's why we were invited. Thank you, Farah. So where does this food focus come from in your books? And especially, Farah, I think the bread focus of this book.
The bread, so I really like to write about my hobbies in my books. I like to give my characters interests. It makes them a more well-rounded character, but I also really like to write about my own hobbies, because that means I don't have to do any research. So bread is one of my hobbies. And it was something that right before I started writing the book, I was getting really into. So it was a very easy thing for me to jump into, to write more about it, because I didn't have to do any research. It was all in my head. I was doing the whole sourdough thing and baking bread regularly. But I think the food focus is very common for like these immigrant stories, because so much of our culture is based, I don't want to say based on food, but it's a big part of what makes our communities unique. Wouldn't you say?
I think it's a language. You're absolutely right. And I even think that, you know, and I'm an immigrant, so I'm not, you know, so we've literally built community, you know, from scratch here. And I think that the glue we use is food. So you're absolutely right. It's completely, it's a glue. It's how we've, you know, tied people to us. It's how we, you know, how we've tried to give culture to our children, which is another interesting thing, I think, with the book. And I was thinking, it's always really funny for me to read books by you and the other immigrant authors who are born and raised here, because I always have this moment where I'm like, oh shoot, am I the parent, right? Because the parents are always so god awful. You know, and I'm like, come on, there's a reason. Although, there's never a reason to be a dick to your children, but it's I do at some point want to talk about that too, about how there is that difference. But yes, I think as parents, we use, the puris, right? In your book, Rina goes home for the puris, right? Yeah. And what a wonderful opening into that whole food as language.
Mm-hmm.
I find that food is a way for immigrant families to hold on to their culture. It's a way of bringing the motherland basically home. It's part of your identity, and it's also as important as language, but in a way that when we have and serve all of these foods in, the comfort foods that we know that are passed down from parents and from where we came from, it's a really visible and visceral reminder of our culture. Even though we are in, like, as an immigrant, we are in a new land, and you have this pressure to assimilate, right?
Mm-hmm. I think that's exactly it. That it's the kind of it's a thing that makes us different from the mainstream community that we're living in the world outside of our house, right? So we hang on to it and we pass that on to our children. And I think that's kind of like I don't want to get philosophical, but that's kind of like the theme of the book is she's trying to like separate herself from her family, from her culture, but at the same time hugely embracing it through the food. And it takes her a while to realize that they're interconnected, that the culture and the food and the family are all really one thing.
Yeah, and that journey, I think, is essentially why, what we write about. And I think that journey is the importance of own voices, right? You can research so much, but you can't research the felt experience of that journey, and I think that's why food leaks into, like, I never set out with Bollywood Affair. And I always tell the story that when I wrote that book, I was completely blindsided by the amount of attention the food got, to a point where I was like, this sounds like exotification. And we've talked about this. And like, this book is about so many other things that all people can talk about is the food. So what is going on here? And it took me it took me some time to realize that I was doing that people were seeing it because I was doing that. I was using food to express emotion and to show connection. And it wasn't so much that people were, so we do this in our lives, right? And so again, this is the various ways in which the two sides of stereotyping, right? So
yeah, that's totally it. And it's funny you said that, because the same thing happened to me with Chai Factor. Is I didn't set out to write a food book at all, and everyone's like, "Oh my God, the food in it." I'm like, "Really? That's just life."
Yeah, that's what you see. That's what you notice.
Yeah.
Between.
I'm different between you two. I actually did set out to write about food, and that was my mission.
Yeah, well, Natalie Tan, the food in Natalie Tan in your first book, it's just like it was about the food.
It is, and like Vanessa is again about the food, all of the food that I ate in Paris when I finally got to go there for the first time. I think it's just that all of us, like from a lot of immigrant families that I know and immigrants that I know, food is just one of those parts of your identities that you don't need to explain. Like, it's just one of those intrinsic things. So to transition to your second question, why do you think food-focused stories work so well when set in immigrant communities?
See, I think the reason I think it works so well is, again, like I said before, it's what's different about our community versus what's happening outside of our walls. But also it shows a similarity. One of the things I absolutely love is when South Asians read my books and then start going on and on, like Sonali with the puri. Like when people connect to it, and they're not connecting to the sari she put on or anything. They're connecting to the taste of the puri or the chana or something. And I think that's why food stories work really well for these immigrant stories.
And the whole monolith thing, right? One of the things I love about this is the specificity of East African Indians, right? That is, I truly dislike. Should I say this in public? I'm not a fan of of generalized Indianness or generalized any culture, right? A generalized whiteness or this whole, like, I actually had someone once say, you know, tell me a story idea, and the name of the person was, I'm not gonna, okay, fine. The name of the person was something, something Burma. And I was like, why did you, like, oh, so this person is Punjabi. Are we talking about Punjabi culture? And she said, no, that just is, you know, an easy to say last name. I was like, okay, let's talk about that for a minute. So I love that when I pick up a certain book, you know, when I pick up a Sarah Desai book, then I'm getting this particular Gujarati, you know, culture in the Bay Area. If I pick up a Sajni Patel book, I'm getting Texan Gujarati, you know, temple focused kind of this very unique culture. Or if I'm picking up this book, you know, I'm getting to learn Tanzanian Indian, you know, culture, and the food is different, and the specificity of it is beautiful. And I think that takes away from this concept that if you've read the checkboxing, right? You've read one South Asian book, you've read them all. You've read one Asian book. I mean, one Asian book, like that's not even one culture, right? I love how Roselle's her, you know, she doesn't call herself Asian in her bio, right? There are we have specific cultures that bringing, and forget, I mean, we can identify as 20 things, but I think for a story, that specificity brings something else alive. And I kind of loved that this community is specifically something, and that in Canada means something else. And, you know, so
Exactly. Are we good?
Yes. It's
it's
Sonali's turn to read the next one.
No, I was waiting for you to answer the question.
Oh, for me. I just think that like for me, growing up in Toronto, and it's very multicultural, but the place where I was at was specifically more East Asian and South Asian, and just a little bit of Canadian.
And I was there too, so yeah.
So for me, it's like when I went to school and everybody opened up their lunch boxes, and like you love that, all of the smells. I'm always scoping out to see who has the best lunches, and it's never the sandwich that I'm looking at. It's never the plain sandwich, hand sandwich. I'm looking at, oh my gosh, somebody bought biryani, or wow, somebody has like japchae in their lunchbox. Yes, like it's that, like it's food is like, it's one of those like sources of comfort that if you're in a strange land and you have all of these pressures to assimilate, to learn the language, to just, you know, like it's just everything is so different and you have to adapt. Food is your source of comfort. And that's why I think that it's so prevalent in immigrant stories.
I think also to that point, a lot of this journeying, you know, telling a dash-based identity, stories of, you know, identities that are hyphenated, it all, and that's why I think being from Toronto, your experience is a whole different experience from my children growing up in the Midwest, right? Where the ham sandwich is what they wanted because they wanted to be like everybody else. And going from that point to, so with my own kids, because my kids did not, my son hit, I think, and this is a really sad story to share, but I think he was in 4th grade and he came home one day and he said, I will not be taking Indian food to school, right? And I was expecting this, you know, as an immigrant parent. I knew this day was coming, and I tried so hard because I had tried to kind of, they had teachers that I would take food to, do all of the desperate, you know, immigrant parent things, and I didn't realize until much later that he had taken tapioca hash, you know, what we call sabudana and khichdi, to school one day and got teased to death about eating worms, you know, or worm eggs or something like that. And he never did. And then in his senior year, he had his white girlfriend and we were all having dinner at the table, and he ate his biryani with his hands. So for me as a mom, that journey, from the moment where this child no longer wanted anything but a ham sandwich and chicken nuggets to a time where he felt, in his skin. And those are the stories we're telling, right? Finding comfort in your skin. And that's why, again, community-wise, a Midwestern story is different from a story that's set in San Francisco or the Bay Area or even New Jersey or Toronto. That's because being the only brown person in your class versus being, one of 25 is a whole different experience. And again, these stories, that's the specificity that makes them unique.
That's so true.
I was gonna say, like, to add, there usually is a generational thing in that immigrants, you come here, your children, the next generation tend to assimilate a heck of a lot better. And may turn away from the culture, but the generation after them are reaching back to get to know their culture more because their parents have turned away a little bit more away from the culture, that they want to rediscover that part of their identity and reclaim it.
Yeah, and a lot of it, you're absolutely right. But also, I think a lot of it also has to do with when the family immigrated, at what age. So my parents are here. Hi, Mom and Dad. But one of the things that I find interesting in my family is my parents came when they were quite young. They were 22 when they moved to Canada, and they then had their kids in Canada. So I don't want to say that they had rejected their culture or anything like that. They were very, very Indian, and their culture was a big part of their lives, but they were also very young and very modern. And so they were very, very easily able to integrate into the society. They are also both spoke English as a first language, even back home. So they didn't have the assimilation issues. And then when they raised us, they never forced, I don't want to say forced, but they didn't really insist on that culture as much because they had already westernized so much. But maybe when parents come when they're older, maybe it's harder, or maybe if the kids were born elsewhere and things like that. So there's so many different identities. And I think what you guys said about it, it's not a monolith. Everybody's experience is different. And that's why we need so many stories like the ones we're telling, so that everybody gets that different perspective.
Right. And that whole, you've read one and you've read it all thing is completely, ridiculous. And you're so right, because I totally relate to what you're saying about your parents. But I remember when I moved here and some of the friends I grew up with were already in grad school here, and I was talking to them and they said, wait until you meet the Indians here. They're nothing like the Indians we met back home. And so even in India, no country is a monolith, but India is literally this, amalgamation of 26 different cultures. And that's also, a conservative number. So that, along with how anglicized you are, how, thank you, colonization, how, which religion that falls under, what spectrum of, just so many, economics, education, all that mixing together with actual differences in language and food and dress and all that is that you're bringing a very different. So even if your child meets another child and, the stories of their parenting are not the same, like not even close. So, yeah.
Exactly.
My turn to ask a question. I love this one. What dish do you remember from your childhood that makes you think of home?
Oh, this is yeah, this is a good one. So this is actually the recipe that I put in the booklet that's going to be handed in to everybody. And it's not in Accidentally Engaged. It's called Mayai Mani. And so everybody's going to get the recipes here. And it reminds me of home. Again, this is very weird because I know my family is listening right now. But we grew up eating it. So then my sister just said, yay. So we grew up eating it and we called it plastic eggs. So basically it's like ground beef and potato curry with eggs baked on top. And my mom would cook the eggs so long that they'd be like this thick layer of like protein that's like it turned into plastic on top. So we called it plastic eggs. When I make it at home, I don't cook the egg quite as plasticky because we like a little bit of a softer egg, but you could do it any which way you want. And that dish is so East African. It's basically keema with eggs baked onto it, but it's such an East African thing. And so my Indian friends wouldn't know what it is. My white friends wouldn't know what it is, but it always reminds me of home. What about you guys? What dish reminds you of home?
For me, it is lumpiang sariwa. It's not the recipe that I have there, which is dumplings, but I'm just thinking that lumpiang sariwa, it's basically a spring roll, but it's fresh and it has vegetables. It has vegetables in it, so you have the fresh wrapper on on your plate, and then you put in a layer of romaine lettuce, and then it's this stir fried mixture of carrots, water chestnuts, green beans, a little bit of shrimp, a little bit of ground pork. Like the shrimp and the ground pork, the proteins are iffy. And then you top it with minced garlic, chili sauce that is made with a thick chili sauce that's made with garlic, chili, vinegar, and tapioca, and put onto the stove so that it's like a thick sauce. And then you put that over with crushed peanuts and sugar, and then you wrap everything up. And the reason why it reminds me of home is because it's so labor intensive to do. It takes such a long time to prepare that it usually takes members of my family to sit down and do all of the preparation. And it also takes a long time to assemble and eat because everybody's gathered at the table, sitting there and putting everything together and eating at the same time. So yeah, it's one of those comfort foods for me.
That's awesome. I love the image of the whole family making it together and then enjoying it at the same time. I love it.
And
That's
I can't talk for the drool in my mouth. And there goes my intermittent fasting. I'm like running after eating. That sounds so good, Roselle. Oh my gosh. I mean, even the simple like garden variety, rice paper spring rolls that you get in the grocery store. I'm like, this is such deliciousness. This is like that times a million. So that sounds amazing. There's so many, food reminds me of home because I come from a foodie family, and just it's all food all the time. Breakfast we're discussing what to eat for lunch, and then lunch we're discussing what to eat for dinner. So it's always been like that. But there is this particular Maharashtrian dish which is called Modak. And what it is it's a dumpling. So it's a rice dumpling steamed, and it's a dessert. So it's filled with fresh coconut and jaggery, which is like molasses, and ghee and nuts. And it is steamed, and again, incredibly labor intensive. It's one of my favorite things that I don't make unless my mother and my mother-in-law or my mother-in-law is around, because it's one of those things you make together, right? Someone needs it because you need to kind of steam the rice, the kneaded rice dough then needs to be steamed, and it can crack if it's not just, like everything has to be just so. And then you kind of, make the little cups and you fold it into a little pointy topped thing. And all of that is, I mean, there's so many points of failure, but when it comes together, it's just the most delicious thing. And I love it so much that when I go home, if I'm not home long enough, if I'm just going to be at my mother's house for a couple of days, and all of her, because she has a checklist of stuff she has to feed me, or rather I have a checklist of stuff she has to feed me. So there are times that I wake up to the smell of modaks because she will make it for me for breakfast.
Oh my
So
goodness.
it is, and you can't freeze it. I've tried. There's no way it has to come hot out of the steamer and into your mouth. And it is just
so good.
So good.
So good.
Is it glutinous rice that you use, or is it just the rice flour?
It's rice flour. And it again, you have to get rice flour that's specific, like that's 30 times sieved. So it's the most powdery of rice flour. So, it's called pithi. So it's almost like talcum powder. It's that. So again, another point of failure. If that's not the right, like if you go to the Indian store and just buy some rice flour, my mother-in-law and my mother will tell you that that is not going to work out. So.
Okay. So the next question is, what dish do you remember from your childhood that makes you, that was the previous one. Is cooking something that was important in your home growing up?
It wasn't, I mean, we cooked and we ate. I don't think it was a big part of our lives growing up. Again, my parents came when they were quite young. My mother we would eat Indian food most of the time, but like big elaborate cooked meals were for parties and such. I think I probably cook more now as an adult than my mother did when I was younger. She would probably argue with me, but I remember big elaborate parties, like where everybody would make like piles and piles of biryani or fresh samosas or something. But I don't remember having that very elaborate meals regularly.
Food is religion in my family. I mean, it is just absurd how much of how we should just take out all idols and worship food. It's, I mean, seriously, it's just this mad thing in our family. And what I remember, so I always say my mom cooked every meal like she's going to war. My dad is a military man. He has actually gone to several wars. So that used to be our joke. In fact, my mom always said his job is to fight for the country and my job is to feed the family. And they did it with as much, I think, passion. And so she never, I don't think, I mean, and I have had to work my way out of that, that level of needing to get it right, perfectionism, right? So my mom never put a bad meal, or I mean, even if it was just dal and rice, it had to be just so. So she took her work so seriously because she considered, she was a homemaker and she considered that her career, and so she was really focused on it. I also think there's a long line of she's youngest of 4 sisters, so everyone kind of always she knows nothing, the whole little sister thing in an Indian family thing that she was doing. So she took it very seriously that everyone has to love every single thing she made. And I kind of grew up with that. So the idea that, that people live in homes where there is just food kind of was a thing I had to come around to. And I'm like, if I have 20 other things to do, it's perfectly okay for this thing not to taste just right. But I don't think I can still kind of make anything that doesn't, that I don't adjust until it feels just right. So yes, it was important.
For me, it was my dad who cooked in my family. My mom and my dad both worked, but my dad was the one who cooked everything. And my family, all of my mother's side of the family lived in Scarborough. And every weekend they would get together. And food is important in that, like, because we got together every weekend, like, they're always bringing food to somebody's house. And food is a way to basically show a little bit of your bragging rights that this is your specialty. You're going to put it on the table and you look at the table. Like, one of my aunt's specialties was my favorite. It was a it was my uncle actually. It was a glutinous rice stuffed roasted chicken. And it was just, every time that was put on the table, there's always this stampede, and that's the first thing that's picked clean with no bones, nothing. So it's like it's always been a matter of pride and a matter of, like, just to see, like, they got better. Like, it is like, I could say that, yeah, my aunts, yes, they had their specialties, yes, they were damn good at making a certain dish or whatnot, but over the years they've took it upon themselves to hone it and just make it better, which I found, like, incredible. And that's part of what the food culture was in my family.
That sounds really tasty.
Yeah. I want to pick some chicken off bones now. But Farah, I know you've sent us all these questions, but can we talk a little bit about the book itself? And
yeah, absolutely.
And can you tell us where it came from? What was the genesis for this wonderfully funny and brilliant story?
So the story is, I got the idea for it a while ago. It's actually, I came up with the character, with Rena's character, before I even wrote Chai Factor. I came up with Rena first, and I had actually started writing the book. I didn't get more than 1 chapter in when I first started it, but the idea was of a food blogger who needs to make cooking videos to enter a contest, and she gets help from her neighbor, and they make the cooking videos together. So I had that idea a long time ago. And then when I started writing Chai Factor, Amira needed a best friend. So I'm like, let's take that character that I wrote, that I started a chapter for, and put her in there. So a lot of her backstory ended up coming from the Chi Factor, because Rena was a pretty big character in there, and she was having issues with her family at that point. So that's where a lot of the story came from. But then obviously she didn't have a love interest in Chi Factor. So then I sat down to write the book, and I needed to give her. I loved Rena by then, exactly. Like I really, really loved her, and I knew she was going through a lot. So I needed to give her somebody that was worthy of her. So I created Nadim as like her perfect, absolute perfect match. He loves her food. He loves bread. He really is the perfect person for her. But of course, I had to conflict, right? We need a book needs conflict. So I gave him the one thing that would be a deal breaker to her, and that is that he's involved with her family. That he works for her father, and her father wants her to marry him, because the whole book is that she's trying to separate herself from it. So that's really where I got the idea from the book, and then it kind of evolved, and it became more foodie, and then we brought the contest into closer into being a bigger part of the plot. But I really ended up writing something that, again, it was intended to be foodie, but it became even more than I anticipated. I think the bread thing became kind of like a comforting thing, that character who's kind of going through a tough time, something that she turned to, and that's sort of relatable for all of us. I mean, how many of us bake bread during this pandemic? So it's interesting how it ended up being a book that people are relating to in this time, when I actually wrote it long before the pandemic, obviously. So that's basically where the book came from.
That's awesome, and he is so incredibly hot. It's, I mean, as delicious as the food is Nadim, I think. Just a brown Captain America.
Brown Captain America, yes, with a British accent. Like, I really put everything
Come
in
on.
to make him so irresistible, because I thought she deserved it, because I'd already fallen in love with the character. And that's kind of an interesting thing that I hadn't done before, is I already knew the character so well, and then I got to write the story for her. Usually I come up with a story first, but it was interesting, because then I got to create her perfect match.
And he's all our perfect match, let's be fair. It's not just us, but I mean, I was just thinking, what could make Chris Evans hotter if he had a British accent and he was brown.
Or if he was brown.
But yeah, it's I did also, and I remember even talking to you about this, is I loved Rena in and that makes so much sense now, because when I was reading Chi Factor, I was like, she has really thought this secondary character through. Like, it's one of the best, best friends. You kind of try to, keep it as you just get a really good, full, fleshed out, like 3-dimensional look at Rena in even in Chi Factor. So now it totally makes sense.
Yeah, she came to me first. It's funny though, I don't grow very attached to my characters' names. So her name wasn't Rena back then in the first draft of Chi Factor. It was somebody else, but the character was there. The character was there from the beginning.
I love that. How do you come up with names? Like, what is your process?
My biggest challenge with names is not to name a character after a cousin. I have a very big family, and eventually it's going to happen. I mean, technically, I probably do have a cousin named Rena and a cousin named Amira and a cousin named, but my family, especially on my mom's side, is enormous. So that is my biggest challenge. I really want to continue writing within this culture. So this Ismaili Muslim East African culture, there's only so many names that I can go through. And when my mother literally has 45 first cousins, and if you think about all of their kids and so much, there's only so many names I can go through. So that's my biggest naming challenge.
Yeah,
what about you guys? Where do you come up with your names?
Yeah, but wait until you have nieces and nephews. That becomes really icky, especially if they're having sex on the page. You're like, oh, I don't, yeah. No.
It's a problem.
No. Yeah, that name worked really well until you started having feelings, and then we walk away from that name now.
That's a romance writer problem.
Yeah. Roselle, what about you?
Names? I honestly have no idea. It's whatever first thing that pops in my head. I try not to name good characters after people who have been not so nice to me in real life. But the ones who are the not so nice end up being antagonists or side characters that I can throw away in there just as a form of therapeutic, you know.
It's just a little bit of fun we can name an antagonist of somebody we don't like.
Yeah, give them slow, painful deaths.
Yes.
Like thriller and crime authors.
I don't think I've ever killed somebody in a book though. I don't think I could do it.
We're not going to talk about that because
we're not going to go there.
There's a lot of anger with one character that I killed off. So
I wonder if that's why Alyssa Cole and Nalini Singh has started writing some mysteries, is to just work some stuff out.
Yeah, because then they're given the permission to write a murder.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was saying that to Nalini. I'm like, this is a dead mother. What does that say? Like, I have horrible fathers. Like my sister-in-law actually once, wrote to me and said, you have the loveliest father on earth, woman. What are you doing? Like, what is this about? You have the most god-awful fathers. And so I did, I explored that a little, and I came up with the fact that I'm using them as metaphors for the patriarchy. But anyway, whole different question.
So what it is Q&A
men in general, not in specific.
Q&A time. So submit your questions. We have 3 pending right now. I have a fun question prompted by Farah's reel that she did, I believe, on the Forever Romance Instagram, that the main thing, or the first step in baking bread, especially sourdough, is to name your starter. What would you name your starter?
I got a brand new starter today.
A brand new starter. Okay. Well, then what's the name?
I haven't named it yet. So it's some very hard to scientist somewhere here in Ontario created a sourdough, but not just with wild yeast, actually created it in a lab. And so my husband's into home brewing, and the homebrew store that he goes to started carrying the sourdough. So he drove all the way there today to pick it up for me. So I have this new starter, and it's in the fridge, and I don't have a name for it yet. But I will name it. Maybe I'll put a poll on my Instagram to what to name the new starter. But
Nadeem. Name him Nadeem.
Then you get Nadeem. Nadeem would.
We've got some good. Some people in the chat says name it after the scientist. Jane says call it Dr. Fauci.
Dr. Fauci. Oh, hi, Jane. So I have actually had sourdough starters called Brian and Sue, and Bob isn't really mentioned in Accidentally Engaged, but in Chai Factor, Rena had Bob. So all of the starters there, I actually named them after real starters.
Sonali, what would you name your sourdough starter?
Nadeem.
Nadeem.
For that reason.
So thrilled. He would love it.
I feel like I should make a dirty joke that would your starter be a grower or a shower?
Even as someone who doesn't bake I'm a cook, not a baker, but I got that.
Roselle, what would you name your sourdough starter?
I've never made sourdough.
I haven't.
But I would name it Zombie just in case it dies.
So you plan ahead. You've got a plan B. So we do have some pending questions. Karina first asks, what are your favorite recipes to write about and describe? Anyone wants to jump in? Take your time to go through your Rolodex of recipes.
So when I was writing this book, one of the things that I found complicated is when I start writing Indian recipes, because there's so many ingredients. And it doesn't always sound right. She put her cumin, coriander, turmeric, chili powder, it just goes on and on and on. So I really enjoyed writing about making bread, because bread has so few ingredients and it's much more tactile. And so I really enjoyed writing about the process of kneading bread and obviously the aroma and the look of it. So I'd say bread.
Sonali?
Can you repeat the question? Sniffling. I have no idea, out of the blue. In the middle of a Zoom call, I have to have the worst sniffles. So it's probably because I just read the sniffling scene from Accidentally Engaged.
Do you have a favorite recipe to write about or describe in your books?
Oh, well, in my current series, which is the Rajesh, the oldest son who's running for governor, his favorite, that's the theme through the book is this gubernatorial race. And here is this really serious, sorted guy, not really because his book's coming, he's a mess, but everyone thinks he's really sorted. His favorite dish is butter chicken, which is chicken makhni. So, which is because he has the world's worst eating habits. So here is this guy everybody thinks is, always responsible and wonderful, who eats donuts and brownies and chicken makhni. So it's so I have a detailed scene of DJ, including steaming the tomatoes. And so he makes even the sauce from, I make a pretty darn good butter chicken, but the sauce comes out of the can. So I have only once made it with peeling the tomatoes and all of that, but and he's making that sauce while having a very complicated conversation. And a tomato is the perfect thing, I think, for a delicate conversation, because it's it's everything about it is delicate, peeling so it's and then mashing it and getting to grind it and all of that as a reflection of feelings was a lot of fun to write.
I think you've hit on something there that's reminding me of when you're writing about food, to pick the food that suits the mood of the scene. There's a scene where Reena's very upset and accidentally engaged, and she's angry, but she can't say anything, and she knows that she's being irrationally angry, and she's kneading bread at the same time, so she's able to take out her anger in the dough. And then like your tomato, when you're having a very delicate conversation. I love that.
Yeah.
Roselle, do you have a favorite recipe to write about in your books?
Dumplings and spring rolls, just because you can have them in so many ways. You can have them steamed, you can have them fried, you can have them as pot stickers where they stick to the pan and it's golden. For me, it's just that it's a very versatile dish that, as Farah said and Sonali said, you can tailor each incarnation to any situation, any emotional situation.
And like, speaking of the connection to food that a lot of people share, I find it very interesting that like every culture has at least one food where it's like dough filled with something delicious. There's always a filled dough, and I love eating filled
Humans
dough.
are smart.
Yeah.
Dough calls for filling, and then you fry it, and then
even better.
Samosas.
So we'll go make samosas next.
So Jessica has a question for Farah. So you mentioned like baking bread has been a hobby during the pandemic. They want to know if you had any other fun hobbies that have developed, and will we see them in any future books or writing?
So I'm the hobby queen. People sometimes ask me, oh, what are your hobbies? I'm like, all of them. So I knit, I crochet, I sew. I used to sew a lot, and sewing and fashion is something that is kind of been something that has been with me for a long time, but I haven't yet really put it into my books, but it will be in future ones. I used to sew my own clothes primarily, and I once did a challenge for several months where I sewed a dress a week. And I had a sewing blog, and I would sew every week. I would go to the fabric store on Monday, and then
that's a flex, Farah. You just
I didn't do anything halfway. So my I have another book coming out this year at the end of the year, and it's my first YA book. And in that YA book, my character is a teen fashion designer, so she wants to be a fashion designer. So I got to put my sewing knowledge, my geeky sewing stuff in that book. Other hobbies I've had, like I used to play the ukulele. Like I said, I knit. We boat. I have a kayak. I'm just not. Lately, I haven't had a hell of a lot of time to do stuff, but I'm not one to just kind of like find one thing and stick with it for my life. I like to change things up a lot.
So you've never known the feeling of boredom, is what you're.
There's always something. There's like yarn in every corner, and then of course books, and writing was supposed to be my next new hobby, but now it's my job, so I don't have room for a lot of other things. But
Tell them about your flower arranging.
flowering. Now, flower arranging is not something I've done a lot of, but Sonali has, which is funny, which is great. But
you have a character who.
Yeah, that's my fashion book, my YA book, is really about flower arranging, and it's not something that's a hobby that I don't have. So the teen fashion designer goes to live in this tiny town for the summer, and she ends up entering a floral sculpture competition. And the idea came to me. I don't know if you guys saw that Netflix show that was out this summer with the what was it called, the Big Flower Fight. So that's basically, it's my fashion meets the Netflix's Big Flower Fight book.
Love that.
So I don't know, maybe I'll take up flower arranging this summer.
So Jane has a question that could apply to all of you. I love Jane. Jane is
lovely. She was my roommate at RWA several years ago.
She lives in my area.
She's so nice.
Yeah, she like attends my romance book club, and
Jane, and she just called you extra, so she's spot on.
So for Farah and Roselle, this is your second book for both of you. Has it felt easier or harder than launching your first book? And then, of course, Sonali is a veteran of book launches. So I wonder if Sonali can speak to whether it gets easier with time or with each new book, or you just kind of have to reinvent the wheel each time.
What do you think, Roselle? Maybe you want to go first?
So the first book came out in normal time, second book came out in pandemic, so that was definitely different.
Yeah, a little different.
Third book is going to come out September 2022. I'm hoping the panty is gone. I feel like with book launches, it's like birth amnesia. It's like you have a kid, it hurt a lot, but you forget. So the next time you're ready to go, you're like, what happened again? I can't remember. I love this baby. It's so great. Like, this whole process is fantastic. And then you go through it again. Oh my God, that hurt. I'm never going to do this again. Oh my God, I love the baby. Baby's so cute. This process is fantastic. I think it's similar to that.
That's a great analogy.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, I'm with Rosie there. My first book, Roselle and I's debuts came out on the same day. So we were together. Then I went to her book launch was on that day. So I went to her book launch on my debut day. And then she came to mine a month later. But it was a very different time. Like, it felt different. Not in a good way or a bad way. I think how Roselle put it is exactly it, is you forget about the anxiety, you forget about the work coming up to it. The biggest difference for me right now is I've got that YA series coming out, so I've got other things going on when I could focus on the one book then. But now I feel like I have more of a career, as opposed to then it felt more like a hobby because I was just starting out, even though it wasn't that long ago. What about you, Sonali? What advice do you have for us?
Run if I'm ever giving you but I feel like also, like children, they come with their own destiny. You can do what you can do, and it's basically what's going to happen is going to happen. So there is some amount of fatalistic acceptance that you do develop, and it behooves you to develop. So there's that. But I do remember thinking when my second book came out, and since we're doing analogies, this is what it felt like. I felt like the first book is like going out into your backyard naked when it's dark, like just to grab something. Nobody knows you're there. You're just going to go get the stuff, come back in. And then your second book suddenly feels like you're going out into your front yard naked in broad daylight, and people have gotten the memo that you're doing it. So that there's that. So the spotlight is of course there, which you want more people watching you go out naked into your yard. So with the book analogy, but I do think that that you can only do everything you can do, which we try to do every single time. And after that, a book has its, so you just have to enjoy it. You have to feel like the star you are today and for the next month, when everyone wants to talk about your book, and just soak it up and enjoy it, because we're all going to be rolling up in a ball and crying at some other time, because that's just life. It goes up and goes down, and you enjoy it.
So we have a question for Farah from Suzanne Park. I'm hoping this is author Suzanne Park.
Oh, I hope it's
because,
hi, Suzanne.
yeah, for those of you who don't know, Suzanne writes some amazing adult contemporary romances and YA.
Coolest person.
Yeah, she's wonderful. I think Belmont has had
People
Suzanne
are
on
like,
a panel before. So Suzanne, you have many fans in the audience and on panel. But Suzanne asks Farah, with such a humorous and fun storyline, how did you approach including the mental health issues and other serious topics?
So yeah, that's an excellent question. I always try to write rom-coms that are grounded in reality, and I don't necessarily do it intentionally. But a thing with a lot of Asian cultures is mental health issues have been kind of like thrown under the rug for a long time, and it's not something that's talked about very openly. But I have a background in psychology, as you mentioned earlier. I used to work with teenagers that had mental health problems. So it's never been something that I've been afraid to talk about or something like that. And I think I like putting it in there, not just for awareness, but just acceptance that mental health issues can happen in these communities. And but then to balance it with rom-com, I find it's tricky. It's not something that comes easily. Usually it takes several revisions for me to get to the point where I feel like I'm handling the issue sensitively, because it's something that needs to be handled sensitively. I don't want ever to have the mental illness issues be a punchline or anything like that. And I think it is possible to have a lighthearted comedic story that still is grounded in the realities of life, and mental illness is a reality that we all have to unfortunately deal with. So, but that's an excellent question.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who has her own mental health issues, like for some people it is debilitating, but for other people, like we have to go about our daily lives and have friends and loved ones and romantic partners while still dealing with these things.
Exactly. And even just laughter is like, it's a comedy, it's a rom-com. There's this idea that people that are going through anxiety or depression can't have that kind of joy, or don't have fun, don't have that laughter in their lives, and that's just not true. So to combine, to take a character that's coping with mental illness or mental health problems and give her a really funny voice, and she enjoys laughing and all that, it can happen, it works.
So our last question is from Karina, who wants to know, are there more books in the works in this universe? They would love to see a book for Syra in particular.
That's the second time somebody's asked me for a book for Syra.
Well, you got to do it.
Syra's, first of all, she's already paired off in Engaged, so she's getting married. She's good. I might add her as a secondary character in something, but I don't imagine writing her own story. Syra has. She was in Chi Factor. She had a crisis, a pretty big crisis in Chi Factor, and you don't really see it because it's like told through 3 different POVs before her. But so she had that problem, and then in Engaged, she kind of turned her life around. I feel like we just need to leave her alone now. She's been through a lot. She needs to heal, and I honestly feel that way. When you write a character, you got to like throw all sorts of shit at them, and bad stuff's gonna happen. And I feel like we just need to let Syra heal, and she's a little bit like, she's a bit of a turbulent person, and I just don't want her to like anything bad to happen to her. So I'm probably not going to go back and write Syra. I am looking to write Rena's cousin Marley, to give her a story. That would be another one that I can go about fashion, because Marley she works in high fashion, and I used to actually work in high fashion too. So that's something I want to do, because she works in high-end retail, which is an industry that I worked in for many years, and it's something that I don't see a lot of books about, that retail environment. So that's something I want to do one day. But my next book is actually not going to have any overlap with any of these characters.
Well,
My next
chat
YA
is screaming for Marley, so
yeah,
they
so
would
one day I'll go back and write Marley, but my next adult book, and then I'll have 2 YA books that are all contracted, and there's no overlap. They're all brand new.
All right.
But while you were talking about Syra, I felt like she sounded like such a, so never say never. I mean,
Never
you
say
know,
never. Yeah, never say
perfect.
never.
She sounds perfect.
So that is the end of our event tonight. This was so much fun. I'm so happy to see all 3 of you. I'm so happy to see the engagement in the chat. All of you romance lovers, we have even more romance events coming up in, I think, April. So April 7th, I think, Abby Jimenez and Emily Henry are going to be in conversation. They're wonderful. And then at the end of April, we have Jessie Q. Sutanto's book, Dial A for Antes. She'll be in conversation with Uzma Jalaluddin, who's going to be talking about Hanukkah Carries On, which is also very good. So we have more romance events, and I'm working on some cool stuff for Bookstore Romance Day in August. So I hope all of you romance readers will come back for those. Thank you to Farah and Sonali and Roselle for joining us tonight. You can buy all of their books, their current releases, Accidentally Engaged, Vanessa Yu. When's Incense and Sensibility coming out, Sonali?
July 6th.
You can pre-order Sonali's book, buy some backlist, and usually we send out an email, I think the following morning, thanking you all for coming, providing links to the website so you can buy books, and we will include the link to the PDF of the recipes all of these authors have provided in case you missed it in the chat. So don't worry, we will get you all of those. And if you miss it, feel free to email events@belmontbooks.com and we can easily send it your way as well. Thank you everyone for coming. If you came in late, we've recorded this so you can check it out on our YouTube within 48 hours to catch up on what you missed. But thank you all so much.
Thank you so much for hosting us. That was a fabulous conversation.
It was wonderful. All right. Thank you guys.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.